of Saul's. 1 Samuel 14:47 says, "So Saul established his sovereignty over Israel and fought against all his enemies on every side, against Moab, against the people of Ammon, against Edom, against the kings of Zobah, and against the Philistines." And so Moab is listed there with the Philistines. Now, there is a connection between David and Moab. David's great-grandmother was a Moabitess. What was her name, Sue? Ruth. Her name was Ruth. Okay? And so that's David's great-grandmother. And so the Moabites are actually in his lineage. And so he takes his father and mother there for safekeeping. In my studies, this is the first mention that I found of David's mother. The first mention that I found of David's mother. He's the son of Jesse, obviously. He's always referred to the son of Jesse. Even when Samuel went to Bethlehem to anoint David, all we hear about is Jesse and David's brothers. We don't hear anything about his mother. So that stood out to me because I had been thinking about that. Well, what about David's mother? What about his mother? And so here we have reference to his mother. And I could only find 3 other references in Scripture to David's mother. Let's see, 4 others. And so there's 5 total. The other 4 are in Psalms. The other 4 are in the book of Psalms. Psalm 51:5. We do not have her name. We're not given her name scripturally. Psalm 51:5 should sound familiar to all of us. David says here, "Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin my mother conceived me." And so he mentions his mother there. That verse there, just a side note, often used attempted to be used to prove original sin or inherited sin. And we know that that's not true. We don't inherit sin. If you need a refresher on that, read the whole chapter of Ezekiel 18. That whole chapter clears that up for us very clearly. Psalm 69 and verse 8. David says here, "I have become a stranger to my brothers and an alien to my mother's children." Psalm 86:16. David says here to God, "O turn to me and have mercy on me. Give your strength to your servant and save the son of your maidservant." And then again in Psalm 116 and verse 16. "O Lord, truly I am your servant. I am your servant, the son of your maidservant. You have loosed my bonds." And so 5 mentions of David's mother I was able to locate in the scriptures, none of which give us her name. Okay. Thoughts, questions, comments on any of that? Any questions on Psalm 51:5 and original sin? That's not what this class is on, but if anybody's got a question on that, we could try to help you this morning with that.
When you mention Ruth, the fact that her name isn't mentioned, I think of in Ruth is it the first chapter, where when she told Naomi, Ruth 1 and verse 16 and 17, she made a commitment there. And this is what it says: entreat me not to leave you, or to turn back from following after you. For wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts you and me. Ruth made a commitment to Naomi's God, and I think when we look at this lineage thing, oftentimes it does refer to the father. It refers to the father. But you know what? I just think about the commitment that Ruth made. She was not only going with Naomi, she was committing to the God that Naomi served. It's kind of like, I guess, the point that Maria made, her heritage was a thing of the past. It's like when we become Christians. I myself, when I obeyed the gospel, there was no one in my family. They were not members. So, oftentimes I had to make sure that I made it clear to my family that my commitment was to God now, not to the Baptist church that I grew up in, not to any of those things. And even, I think we talked about this last week, even within the church, we have to make sure that we stand for what God stands for. Even if our own Christian family members are not doing what they're supposed to, we can't just get with them and do whatever. So, I think it's pretty fitting that Ruth's past was not included as far as David was concerned, because that's what it was to her. The fact that she was a Moabite and she left all of that. Does that make? I don't know if that makes sense.
Okay. You mean as far as it not being mentioned here, as that being her lineage, if you will, coming from Moab? Okay. It's true though. She did commit to the God of Naomi, who was the God of Israel, who is our God as well.
Plan that God had.
That's right. And we actually see, got another hand over here? Okay.
Part of that is that God uses people, and it doesn't really matter. His people were the Hebrew people, yes, the Jews, but he used Ruth in this case, who was not a Jew, and it goes down to the New Testament where it says God is not a respecter of person.
That's right. But in any nation, he that worketh righteousness is accepted by God. Acts chapter 10, there in the conversion of Cornelius. But so thanks for all the comments. In verse 3, David says to the king of Moab, please let my father and mother come here with you till I know what God will do for me. When we summed up the account of David and Goliath, we said that David defeated Goliath for 3 reasons, and one of those reasons was his focus. And we made the point that his focus was squarely on God, regardless of what the threat was. And that's what I see here again in verse 3. King Saul is after him. He's conscientious enough to understand that his family is in danger. He gets them to safety in Moab, but he's still looking for God to rescue him. His focus is still on his God. His focus is still on his God. And then we see God show up in verse 5. The prophet Gad said to David, do not stay in the stronghold, depart and go to the land of Judah. So David departed and went into the forest of Hereth. The prophet Gad, he's a prophet of the Lord. He's a prophet of God. He's speaking for God. God tells David to get out of there. And David leaves there and he goes to Judah. Okay? And so God did show up. And God is with David throughout his time as a fugitive. All right? And then this the next passage here really is verses 6 through 19. For the sake of time, we won't read all of it. But King Saul, just to give kind of an overview, King Saul, as we know, he's after David. He gets word that from Doeg the Edomite that David has visited Ahimelech, and Ahimelech helped him. King Saul calls for Ahimelech and all of his family to come to see King Saul. He accuses Ahimelech of teaming up with David, helping out David. He accuses his son of teaming up with David to take the kingdom from Saul. And King Saul commands his servants to kill Ahimelech and his father's house. Sad moment here in the life of King Saul. His servants do not do it. His servants refuse the command. He turns to Doeg the Edomite and tells him to do it, and Doeg does it. He kills Ahimelech. We can read verses 18 and 19. We'll start in 17. Then the king said to the guards who stood about him, turn and kill the priests of the Lord. How do you fix your mouth to say that? How did he fix his mouth to say that? Turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because their hand also is with David, and because they knew when he fled and did not tell it to me. See how he's twisting the truth? He's telling a lie. Ahimelech didn't know why David came. He asked David, and David didn't tell him the truth. David lied. But King Saul is lying here, and he's telling this lie to coerce his servants into committing this heinous act. But the servants of the king would not lift their hands to strike the priests of the Lord. They had enough sense to know that's not right. They had enough reverence for God and God's priests to know that we're not going to do this. We understand you're the king, but they are the priests, and we're not going to do it. Verse 18, the king said to Doeg, you turn and kill the priests. So Doeg the Edomite turned and struck the priests and killed on that day 85 men who wore a linen ephod. 85 priests Doeg killed. Verse 19, also Nob, the city of the priests, he struck with the edge of the sword both men and women, children and nursing infants, oxen and donkeys with sheep, with the edge of the sword. So he didn't just wipe out Ahimelech and his father's house. He wiped out basically the whole city of Nob and all the priests there. The wording at the end of verse 19 sounds awfully similar to the command God gave Saul regarding Amalek. But you know, Saul didn't do that. You know, he didn't do what God said. But of his own accord and of what he wanted to do, he went all out. He spared no expense. There was nothing that he held back when it was what he wanted to do. You know, men do that today. If it's something we want to do, we're full speed ahead. Nothing's going to get in our way. Nothing's going to stop us. Obstacles pop up. We brush them aside as if they're nothing. But what God says to do, if we do it, we'll drag our feet. We'll get around to it eventually. Well, I don't know if that's really what he wants me to do. I see it in the scripture, but I don't know if that applies to what we got going on now. Times have changed. We might get around to it and then get around to it and half-heartedly do it and say, well, God understands. I did the best I could. Self-willed, no will, I don't know what that is, but we see it. We see it all the time. We see it all the time. We got to do better. If we're doing that, we've got to do better. Chapter 23.
I guess one of the things that sort of stood out in this chapter was back in verse number 1, chapter 22, because, it says, once David went to that cave, it says, so when his brothers and all his house heard it, they went down there with him. And I thought that was interesting because, just a few chapters previously when David went against Goliath, and it was his oldest brother, Eliab, who kind of, chastised David for,
Showing up.
Yeah, showing up there and speaking the things he was saying. So it was like they were against him, and his brothers were in Saul's army, right? So they were actually, Saul's army. Now, I don't know about how the other ones felt toward David, but at least it records Eliab didn't have a good feeling about David and him even being there. But now, here, it looks like they have decided that they would side with David and go with David. They kind of believed in what David was standing for, I guess, and evidently could see the difference between him and Saul. And I thought about that in the context of, you think about Jesus' brothers. The time that he was, in his ministry, meaning they didn't believe him. They didn't side with him. It wasn't until later on that they actually came to that belief, and his brothers that actually followed and became disciples of his. Mm-hmm. So I just saw kind of a similarity there in this family thing that took place.
Good. And they may have had some help. And this goes over into the realm of speculation, but we see how Saul is treating those that he thinks are helping David in any way. And so there may have been some persecution to come down on Jesse and his household. We don't have a record of that. Again, that's speculation. But they did join David in that cave. And so we see a turn, at least in Eliab, if he was there with his family, turn to David instead of being against David. So great point. Chapter 20. I'm sorry.
I just wonder, you brought out last time how Ahimelech had disobeyed the law and said that the showbread is only for the priests. And even Jesus confirmed that it was not lawful for him to give it to David and his men. So in a sense here, I see God's judgment coming down on him for that sin. He didn't let it just go. He didn't let it slide. Ahimelech paid the price for his sin, as I see it.
He did, and I also read that this was also a continuation of the pronouncement of judgment against Eli, that no one from his household would remain a priest. And I didn't have time to really dig into that and see where that line came from and whether it was Ahimelech that was a descendant of Eli or not. And so I didn't bring that out. But yes, Ahimelech met an unfortunate end, and his family, and then the whole city of Nob, all those priests. So Saul is murderous at this point, if he wasn't already. So David leaves. He leaves the forest there in Judah in chapter 23. He goes to defend the city of Keilah against the Philistines. In verse 2, David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I go and attack these Philistines? The Lord said to David, go and attack the Philistines and save Keilah. But David's men said to him, look, we're afraid here in Judah. How much more then if we go to Keilah against the armies of the Philistines? So David's men, I said they weren't yet an army. They're scared. They're already scared. They said, look, we're already scared. You're going to go and fight the Philistines? We're afraid here with our own people. David inquired of the Lord once again in verse 4, and the Lord answered him and said, arise, go down to Keilah, for I will deliver the Philistines into your hand. And David and his men went to Keilah and fought with the Philistines, struck them with a mighty blow, and took away their livestock. So David saved the inhabitants of Keilah. Abiathar escaped. We didn't look at that. That was at the end of chapter 22. But he was a priest that escaped from the city of Nob. And so we see him again mentioned here in verse 6. Now it happened when Abiathar, the son of Ahimelech, fled to David at Keilah, that he went down with an ephod in his hand. So we drop down to verse 13 here. We'll see that David's 400 men have now grown to 600 men. Verse 13 reads, so David and his men, about 600, arose and departed from Keilah and went wherever they could go. Then it was told Saul that David had escaped from Keilah, so he halted the expedition. And so Saul heard that David was in Keilah. He was set to attack Keilah. David inquired of the Lord again, will the men of Keilah turn me over? God said they will. And so David got out, saving himself, his men, and the city of Keilah. Let's see, verses 16 through 18, we have another encounter with Jonathan and David. Then Jonathan, Saul's son, arose and went to David in the woods and strengthened his hand in God. And he said to him, do not fear, for the hand of Saul my father shall not find you. You shall be king over Israel, and I shall be next to you. Even my father Saul knows that. So the two of them made a covenant before the Lord, and David stayed in the woods, and Jonathan went to his own house. And so here we see some more encouragement for David. More encouragement. Jonathan finds him in the wilderness of Ziph. He goes and sees his buddy. Builds him up a little bit, tells him don't fear. Said, my father won't find you. And he reassures David that he will be the king over Israel. King Saul gets word that David is in Ziph. David flees to Maon. Saul follows him there. And then in verse 27 of this chapter, a messenger comes to King Saul. But a messenger came to Saul saying, hurry and come, for the Philistines have invaded the land. Therefore Saul returned from pursuing David and went against the Philistines. So they called that place the Rock of Escape. Then David went up from there and dwelt in strongholds at En-Gedi. So Saul, while David was at Maon, Saul got really close to him. If you look at verse 26, the Bible reads, then Saul went on one side of the mountain, and David and his men on the other side of the mountain. So David made haste to get away from Saul, for Saul and his men were encircling David and his men to take them. And so it just so happens that the Philistines attack Israel at that point when Saul is about to capture David. I think we call that God's providence. We see the hand of God in that. Okay.
You know, God can put a mountain between you and your enemy.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so, you know, trust in him, because, I mean, we don't know always the enemy and, you know, where he's coming from, where he's going to do, but trust God, as David did, and God will take care of that.
God will take care of it. That's right. That's right. So, chapter 24, Saul comes back from fighting the Philistines. He gets word that David is in En-Gedi. In verses 3 through 7, Saul and David wind up in the same cave. Verses 3 through 7 of chapter 24. So he came to the sheepfolds by the road where there was a cave, and Saul went in to attend to his needs. David and his men were staying in the recesses of the cave. Then the men of David said to him, "This is the day of which the Lord said to you, Behold, I will deliver your enemy into your hand, that you may do to him as it seems good to you." And David arose and secretly cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Now it happened afterward that David's heart troubled him because he had cut Saul's robe. And he said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch out my hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord." So David restrained his servants with these words and did not allow them to rise against Saul. And Saul got up from the cave and went on his way. And so we see the character of David here. Once again, we see his focus on God. David said, "It's not for me to touch him. It is not for me to do anything to King Saul, even though he wants to kill me." And that's the very reason he's in this area, is because I'm in this area. He said, "It's not for me to do it." And so he doesn't do it. We'll stop there. We'll pick up there next week.